Thank you, Ms. Marsh, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
I'm here today to talk about a topic that is not pleasant, that is not enjoyable, that isn't fun to listen to, but a topic that I feel is very important for you to hear about, to be aware of, and to know about. Before I start, I'd like to say to all of you, I welcome your questions, but I'd like to ask that you hold your questions until I finish my presentation. So if a question comes to mind as I'm speaking with you this afternoon, try to remember it, and when I am finished, I hope you'll have some questions to ask. I am here today to bear witness to the Holocaust, to acknowledge and honor those individuals and their families who risked their lives to save the lives of people like myself, and to share my story with you. And I would like to begin by asking each of you to think about your lives as they are today. I'd like for you to think about your lives with your families, with your parents, with brothers and sisters if you have any, grandparents, cousins, aunts and uncles, and any other member of your family. I'd like for you to think about your lives here at your middle school, the classes that you're in, the activities, the clubs, the organizations you might belong to, the friends you've made since you've been here. I'd like for you to think about those things you do outside of school in the evenings, on weekends, during vacations. And all those things that each and every day you have the chance to participate in and might even take for granted. And having done that for just a few seconds, I now would like for you to imagine the following things happening to you. I'd like you to imagine you come back to your middle school tomorrow, and as you walk into your school, you realize there have been some dramatic negative changes take place overnight. Any of the artwork, any of the pictures, any of the posters you might see around the school today are gone. And in their place you find new artwork, new pictures, new posters that promote discrimination, bigotry, hatred, and violence. I'd like you to imagine as you walk into your classes that the teachers you have today are gone. And in their place you find new individuals who begin class by making a mockery of and attacking your religion. Imagine too that these same individuals begin to verbally, abusively attack you as a person because of your religion. Imagine then your fellow students, your fellow classmates, your friends try to come to your defense. But they are very quickly told they cannot do that. So your fellow students, your fellow classmates, your friends get quiet. They begin to ignore you, they begin to shun you, they begin to also verbally, abusively attack you as a person. So you decide to share what's going on at school with your parents. And all your parents can say to you is to get along as best you can, or perhaps talk with a school counselor. So you decide to talk to a school counselor. Except the counselor you may have spoken with before is also no longer here. And the person taking that counselor's place refuses to talk with you or to listen to you. So now you're stuck. You have to get along as best you can. Imagine now some time passes, and that little by little, the activities, the clubs, the organizations you might belong to here at school are no longer available for you to participate in. At home, your parents have gotten much more serious and much more concerned. And very suddenly, your mother or your father or both lose their jobs or their careers or their businesses, all because of their religion. As you go to and from school, you see people being physically attacked and beaten in the streets. And most of the population just stands by and lets it happen. More time passes. And now I'd like you to imagine that those things you're used to doing outside of school in the evenings, on weekends, during vacations, like going to a movie or going to the mall or whatever it is you enjoy doing, you're no longer allowed to do them. You come back to your school one day and you are told you are no longer welcome here, or any other school in the area. And for a few days or maybe a couple of weeks, that might not seem to be too bad, because you now have an extra added vacation. But you realize very quickly to miss being here, that you miss the opportunity to learn, that you miss the opportunity of being with young people your own age, that you have no choice. More time has now passed. And now I need you to imagine that one night you are awakened out of a deep sleep by some loud noise and commotion outside your home. Then there is a loud knock on your front door. You hear your mother get up and answer that knock. In a few seconds, she walks into your bedroom and she says to you, you have to get up, you have to get dressed, you need to pack some clothes and some other things you think you might need, because you and your family have to leave your home. You ask her why. And all she can say to you in a very trembling voice is that there isn't time to talk about or to ask why. So you get up, you get dressed, you do pack some clothes and some other things you think you might need. And as you walk out of your bedroom into the front part of your home, you now realize and understand why your mother's voice trembles. Because you are faced and confronted by several individuals with guns pointed at you. So you and your family walk out the front door. As you adjust to the darkness outside, what you see are some trucks parked in front of your house and up and down your street. You see young people like yourselves, younger children, babies, and adults being forced on the back of those trucks. Unfortunately, you also see and you witness some individuals who try to resist. And you see them shot and killed in front of your eyes. So you and your family go on the back of one of those trucks. You are tired, you are angry, you are confused. And you have no idea what's going to happen to all of you next. But you find out in a few minutes, or perhaps a half hour or an hour. Because as those trucks leave the front of your home and leave your street and leave your neighborhood, they drive to the nearest railroad station. And when they get there, they drive up to a very long freight train. And now you and all the others are forced, like animals, to get into a freight box car. As you step into your freight box car, you can see there is very little food, there is very little water, there are no sanitary facilities of any kind. And a freight box car that might hold 50 or 75 people is now crammed full with nearly 200 of you. You cannot sit down, you cannot lie down, you're forced to stand. The doors to your boxcar close and the train begins to move. It is very dark, it is very cold, it is very uncomfortable. And what you hear for the next 3 days as the train travels is the cries of babies and the hysteria of some of the adults. see and you witness some elderly people get sick and crumple to the floor. When the train finally stops and the doors to your boxcar open and you look outside for the first time in 3 days, what you see is some barren ground and some wooden buildings surrounded by high barbed wire fences. You have no idea where you are. And now, once again, like animals, you are taken out of the freight boxcar that you're in, and you are marched into one of those wooden buildings. As you walk in, you can see there is very little furniture, there are very few beds, there is mostly straw on the floor. You live in this place and you survive in this place for the next 20 to 24 months. And during that time, you live on just 2 meals per day that for the most part consist of a watery soup and some bread. You see many people get sick, many of them die. But somehow, someway, you and your family do manage to survive. And then I want you to imagine that one day your father says to you, let's take a walk. You ask him where you're going. And he says to you, there are some individuals who have come to this place whose main purpose, whose main mission, whose main goal is to rescue and save as many young people like yourselves, children and babies from this place. And your dad says to you, he wants you to leave this place with a complete stranger. Someone you've never seen before. You ask him if he and your mom are coming with you. And he says to you, no, we can't. So you turn to your dad and you say to him, then I don't want to go either. But you realize by the tone of his voice that what he's asking you to do is something you need to do and you must do. So within a few short minutes, you say goodbye to your dad, goodbye to your mom. You have no idea if you will see either one of them again. And you leave this place with a stranger. Now, before I go on, the question is, did this really happen? And the answer is yes. Did this happen to a small number of people, like 50 or 100, or maybe 1,000 people? And the answer is no. This happened to millions and millions of people a long time ago, between 1935 and 1945. And then we have to ask the questions, why did this happen? And how could this happen? And to answer those questions, I'm going to take you way, way back to the end of World War I. Germany lost World War I very badly because of that. Conditions in Germany were pretty awful. People were angry and upset. The economy was in shambles. Inflation was very high. Unemployment was very high. People had a very difficult time getting enough money together to buy food, clothes, and other necessities. And along came a very evil young man by the name of Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler had some very strong ideas about how to solve and take care of all of Germany's troubles and problems. His ideas had to do with getting rid of and eliminating all minority groups all over Germany, all the undesirables, namely the Jews. So he began to make very hateful, very evil speeches. Speeches that promote discrimination, bigotry, hatred, and violence. And in the beginning, very few people listened. The crowds were very, very small. And as a matter of fact, Adolf Hitler was even arrested and put in jail because he himself got involved in violence. during the time he spent in jail, Adolf Hitler wrote a book. The book was called Mein Kampf, for My Struggle. And in that book, he wrote about it, he outlined what he would do if he ever came to power in Germany. When he got out of jail, he went back to making those hateful, evil speeches. And unfortunately, little by little, the crowds began to grow. People began to believe in what he said. And then he formed the Nazi Party, along with 6 other evil men, a very small group of 7 people. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because those 7 evil men grew in numbers to be hundreds, and then thousands, and eventually millions of Nazis. And in less than 20 years, they had created and caused what we know today to be the Holocaust, which turned out to be the killing of more than 11 million innocent people. 11 million innocent people. Now that's a very, very large number. If you can try to think about it, or possibly imagine, every one of us living in the state of Colorado today, every man, every woman, every young person like you, every child, every baby living in our state today. And if all of us were to die tomorrow, more than twice as many people died in the Holocaust as live in the whole state of Colorado today. Now, I said the Nazi Party began to grow in numbers. In the beginning, they also did run in local and state and national elections. In 1932, the Nazi Party got 30% of the vote in Germany. Less than half, not a majority. A man by the name of Hindenburg was elected president. President Hindenburg was not a Nazi, but he was 85 years old and in very bad health. On January 30th, 1933, President Hindenburg made a very terrible mistake. He appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany, which at that point in time meant that Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Party, were now second in control, second in power in all of Germany. And then in August of 1934, President Hindenburg died. And Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Party, took complete control of power in Germany. And all those things I spoke about a few minutes ago began to happen. Students like yourselves lost the right to participate in school activities, school clubs, school organizations, eventually lost the right to go to school. People like your parents lost the right to vote, lost their jobs, their careers, their businesses. People were physically attacked and beaten in the streets. And most of the German population just stood by and let it happen. Then a major event took place all over Germany on the night of November 9th and 10th, 1938. The event was called Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. On that night, several thousand homes, several hundred synagogues, several hundred businesses were firebombed and destroyed. Thousands of people were injured. Hundreds were killed. And this time the world stood by and let it happen. So why am I here this afternoon talking about this? And what have I got to do with any of this? Well, let me say to you, I speak to students like yourselves quite often. And I do that because there are individuals and organizations in our world today, some in our own countries, some in our own states, some in our own communities, who are trying to rewrite history, who would deny the Holocaust ever happened. And I'm here to say to you, it did happen. And as a very, very young child, I was there. 1938 in Mannheim, Germany, a very large city in the southern part of Germany. I had a younger sister born June the 4th of 1940, and it's a real miracle she was even born because of the conditions that existed in Germany at that time. On October 22nd, 1940, my family got the knock on the front door I described to you a few minutes ago. My 4.5-month-old sister, my mother, my father, and I, along with hundreds of other Jews, were taken out of our home. Then taken by truck to the nearby railway station. Then taken by freight train like animals from Mannheim, Germany to the southern part of France to a place called Cahn. Now why France? Well, as you will learn in your World War II history somewhere down the road, the Nazis conquered and occupied France in early 1940. And as a result, the French government, called the Vichy government, chose to assist and cooperate with the Nazis. And one of the things the French government did was to build a large number of holding and detention camps all over France. Places for people like us to be taken to until the Nazis could decide what to do with us next. So my family arrived by freight train at Cahn on October 25th, 1940. The first winter we were there were 12,000 men, women, young people like yourselves, children and babies in this one holding camp alone. Of those 12,000 people that very first winter, more than 1,000 died of starvation, disease, or froze to death. Somehow, some way, my parents were able to keep us alive. And I have to say to you, I have no idea how my mother kept my 4.5-month-old sister alive, but she did. We lived there, we survived there until August of 1942. Now, I said the French government chose to assist and cooperate with the Nazis, but there were hundreds and hundreds of French people who chose to do things differently, who chose a higher road, who chose a higher goal, who chose to risk their lives by joining an organization called the French Resistance. And one of the goals, one of the purposes, one of the missions of the French Resistance was to rescue and save as many young people like you, children and babies, from these holding camps. To do that, they first had to find a way to get into those camps. And what they did was to pose as workers. Once they got inside those camps, they then had the much more difficult task of trying to convince people like my parents to give up their children to them to be rescued. So in August of 1942, my parents had a very difficult, a very terrible decision to make. A decision that no parent should ever have to make. They could choose to keep my young sister and I with them to see what would happen to all of us next, or they could choose to give us up to complete strangers, not knowing what would happen to us, not knowing if they'd ever see us again, but hoping if they made the choice to give us up, that we'd be better off. My parents made the choice to give us up. And then the question is, did they make the right decision? The answer is a very definite and emphatic yes. Because if they had not done that, I would not be here this afternoon, I would not be alive today to talk about it. And the reason for that is that less than 1 month later, on September the 16th, 1942 to be exact, my parents, along with hundreds of others, including some young people like you, some children, some babies, who were not given up and therefore not rescued, were put on another freight train. And this time the freight train took them from the southern part of France to Poland, to the Auschwitz concentration camp. One of the most horrendous, one of the most horrific of all the killing camps that existed all over Europe. And you have to understand now, the concentration camps were not like the holding camps. In the holding camps, you had a chance to survive. In the concentration camps, the chance of surviving was very, very slim. As a matter of fact, less than 4%. Less than 4 out of 100. Less than 40 out of 1,000. And so on. The train my parents were on carried 1,003 people. Again, men, women, some young people like you, some children, some babies who had not been given up and therefore not rescued. It arrived at Auschwitz on September the 18th, 1942. By January 27, 1945, when Auschwitz was freed from just that one train alone, of those 1,003 people, only 38 were still alive. 965 had died from just that one train alone. Now you try to think about or imagine hundreds and hundreds of such trains arriving at different concentration camps all over Europe, all the time, and you get some idea of where the 11 million innocent people comes from. As these trains arrive, one of the first things that people sometimes heard was a small band playing at the station, which is ridiculous and absurd, but true. The first thing that people saw as they got out of the freight box cars this time were Nazi officers and doctors standing on the platform, pointing to the left or pointing to the right. Now, what did that mean? And let me say to you, this is difficult to talk about. It may be hard for some of you to hear, but because it happened, and because it's true, I have to share it with you. And remember that I, as a 4.5-year-old child, my sister, as a 2.5-year-old, were not on that train. If you were sent to the left, you were usually under the age of 12 or 13, or over the age of 55 or 60, or you looked to be in bad health, or you might have a physical handicap, or maybe, just maybe, the Nazi officer or doctor just didn't like your looks. If you were sent to the right, you were usually over the age of 12 or 13, under the age of 55 or 60, looked to be strong, looked to be healthy, looked to be able to do a very hard day's work. And this is the hard part. If you were sent to the left by a Nazi doctor, what that meant was that you were going to have medical experiments performed on you without anesthetics. If you were sent to the left by a Nazi officer, it meant you would die that day. And the first thing that happened to you was all of your hair was shaved off, all of your clothes were taken away, and you were made to feel subhuman, just like an animal. And then you were told you're being sent to the showers to be cleansed. Except the showers were not showers. They were gas chambers. And instead of water coming out of the faucets, gas came out. and within minutes people died a horrible, horrible death. If you were sent to the Reich, you were given a chance, at least for a while, to survive in Auschwitz. And if you were very, very lucky and you had some musical talent, you might even get a chance to play in that small band to welcome future trains. Which again is ridiculous and absurd, but true. Or you might get to be a carpenter or a seamstress or a janitor or some such job. But for most of those sent to the Reich, that is not what they had to do. They now lived on just one meal per day that for the most part consisted of a watery soup and some stale bread. The kinds of jobs they had to do were to dig mass graves, to pull the dead bodies out of the gas chambers and throw them in those graves. In some cases, because very, very, very young children and babies were burned alive in the ovens, they had to dig out the bones of those babies and children. And even worse. The day the train arrived, with my parents on it, my father was sent to the Reich and given the chance to survive in Auschwitz. And he turned out to be one of the 38 still alive on January 27, 1945. He lived through it, he survived it, he did whatever horrible, horrible things he had to do to make it. That same day, my mother, at the age of 29, was sent to the lab. And she died that day. She had never committed a crime. She had never hurt anyone. She was killed because she was Jewish. Period. No other reason. Now let me go back and talk about what happened to me after I was rescued from Camp Girls. In addition to those very brave and courageous and heroic French people who were part of the French resistance, there were also hundreds of French families who chose to risk their lives by taking in Jewish kids like me and hiding them from the Nazis. I was taken in by a French Christian family, a family who didn't know me. They were Christian, I was Jewish. They had absolutely no reason to risk their lives to save mine, but they did. They chose to hide me in their basement. And I lived in the basement of my French Christian rescue family from August of 1942 to the spring of 1944. I very seldom got to go outside. My French Christian rescue family took very good care of me. They fed me well. They made me as comfortable as they could. And they spent as much time as they could in that basement with me. But they had to be very, very careful so as not to attract the attention of Nazis outside. They had to also convince me as a 4.5-year-old child to be as quiet and still most of the time. The house I was in was never searched. Therefore, I was not discovered. Therefore, I lived and I owe my life to my French Christian rescue family. By the spring of 1944, when the Nazis no longer occupied a part of France, I was reunited with my sister. I had not seen her in more than a year and a half. She and I got back together in an orphanage outside of Paris, where we lived from the spring of 1944 to the fall of 1946. My father, who had survived Auschwitz and all of its horrors, had gone back to live in Germany. And he spent from the summer of 1945 to the fall of 1946 searching for us, tracing us, and finally finding us in the orphanage outside of Paris. So in the fall of 1946, my sister and I were reunited with my father. He had survived Auschwitz and physically he was okay. But as a person, he lost an awful lot. He never, ever spoke about his experiences or what he had to do to survive. He told us our mother had died. He would not talk about what happened to her. There were no pictures of the family around the house. And after just a few short months, because I think he realized he wasn't being the kind of father he should be or maybe wanted to be, he began to make plans for my sister and I, just the two of us, to come to America to a better life. And it has been a very good life for us. We arrived in Colorado in the spring of 1950. In the beginning, we lived with my grandparents in Pueblo, Colorado. They and my mother's 5 brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles, had gotten out of Germany in 1939. They promised us they would do all they could to get us out, which of course did not happen. So we lived with them for 3 years. They got too old to take care of us. They sent us to Denver. My sister lived in 2 foster homes that did not work out for her. I lived in 1 foster home that did not work out for me. So we both wound up in an orphanage in West Denver where we lived until we graduated high school. I went on to the University of Colorado in Boulder, graduated from there, started my career, got married, raised a family. For this afternoon, that's where I'd like to stop with my story. I guess we're not going to have time for questions, but before we end, I'd like to say just 2 more things to you. First, if you get nothing else out of my presentation this afternoon, I'd like for you to remember that one very evil man, Adolf Hitler, and then 6 others, a small group of 7 people, were able to create and cause the Holocaust, which once again turned out to be the killing of more than 11 million innocent people. Of those 11 million, more than half, 6 million were Jews. But there were 5 million others. Those of other minority groups. Those who did try to resist Hitler. Those who took a Jewish kids like me and were discovered and sent to concentration camps to die. The second thing I'd like to say to all of you before we finish is that you as young people, I as an adult, have a responsibility to never let this happen again. Now, having said that, those words don't mean very much, because we've had other Holocausts on a smaller scale. In Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Bosnia. So what can you do? Well, as I say to students like yourselves quite often, every time we make this presentation, the next time you hear anyone make a racist or racial joke or some bad comment about some group of people, instead of standing by and listening and letting it be said, I'd like you to stand up to that person no matter who it is, and very strongly say to them, that's not okay with me. And if each of us will do that over and over and over again, we can make our schools, our neighborhoods, our communities, our state, and our country a better place in which to live. Thank you very much.